Ooh, do we have any oil pressure? No oil pressure yet, huh? Welcome back, viewers. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. It is raining like crazy outside. I hear we might even get hail today. Off camera, I did a whole bunch of stuff. At the beginning of the last video, you saw the car go rolling past. That was Sunday. Steve and his son Leo came over here and we crossed a whole bunch of stuff off the list. Number one, the sill plates are back in, front and rear. Number two, the front seats are bolted in permanently, mostly permanent right now. I bled the brake master cylinder as well as the clutch master and the slave. So we have something resembling brakes and we have something resembling a clutch. Exhaust manifold now has a gasket on it. I just had it on there to mock it up. So the manifold and the wastegate are now on permanently. The turbo is just sitting there for now. We had to get to a brake line junction block behind that. Something else I noticed while we were wiring up the starter, the connection to the solenoid on the starter, this is just a wire that is soldered on there. And I don't know if you can see that, but this thing is barely hanging on. So I'm gonna cut that off, strip it back, and resolder it. There, that's better. Now I can get that cut back, re-stripped, and soldered back on there. There we go. That's not quite as pretty as it used to be, but it's definitely on there now, and I don't think it's going anywhere. So I'll throw the starter back in. Another thing that's on my list is I need to make an EGR block-off plate. I have this sheet of, I think this is 14 gauge aluminum. So all I did was trace out the gasket here on the aluminum here. I'm just gonna cut this out, punch those holes, and then that's gonna be my block-off. So here's my squid plate. This goes on the back side of the intake manifold where the EGR valve used to bolt up. So this is the block-off plate for that. I was really hoping that would be that quick. I do have to trim this just a little bit more along the bottom edge here because this butts up tight to that intake manifold. All right, there it is. Trim the bottom to match a little bit, and I even found 3 bolts for it. Reasonably suspect these are even the right size. For those that don't know, those on the back side underneath the intake manifold, that's where the EGR valve used to mount, and it no longer does. So slam this on. This is one of those things. It's been on the list forever. Don't know why it took me so long. That is a custom 3D printed distributor cap delete made by my friend Jeremiah. You can see the BS logo in there. I think this thing turned out awesome. This is just the first iteration. There you go. If you're ever running coil on plug like I am and you don't need your distributor anymore, you can get rid of that big ugly cap. Welcome back to the shop. Today is the day, I hope, we are going to fire this thing up. I've got a bunch of stuff to do, a little bit of odds and ends to button things up on the engine, and then I'm hopefully gonna walk you guys through loading in an initial tune or creating one, and going through the startup sequence, calibrating sensors, etc. Oh, and by the way, if you guys hear chainsawing, it's like the National Chainsaw Championship in my neighborhood this weekend. Everybody's running them, so I apologize in advance. I did a whole bunch of stuff between this video and last. Obviously, you can see here's the throttle cable. That's from a 93 Nissan 240SX. It does reach and it does work. I did have to mount it up a little bit higher than normal, just so that it clears the downpipe for the turbo. I also spent a bunch of time hooking up lines. This one's obviously got to be put on. And plugging a bunch of ports and stuff on the intake that I'm not going to use. I ran vacuum lines to the blow-off valve and to the wastegate on the other side. This hose right here comes from the factory PCV valve. I still have to get a catch can or something like that, so I just have a long hose run off to the side just for now. The wiring is mostly done. I do need to mount like this junction block along with the other one on the firewall there. I have some screws to do that. And let's see, yeah, obviously the radiator's not mounted. But I think what I'm going to do is finish up the few electrical things I have to do, as well as anything glaring, like I have to at least put the downpipe on so the exhaust doesn't just shoot right at the firewall. And then I think we'll get to actually powering up the ECU for initial config. So,
do you know what size this is going to be?
If you can tell, I have reinforcements. Andrew is back. Steve 2.0 is here. We are hoping to get to fire this up today. We're currently dogpiling to get as much stuff clamped off or capped off that we're not using or anything like that. So we're trying to get to the point where we can actually crank it and start calibrating sensors and whatnot.
And maybe not starting it on fire.
Well, there's a fire extinguisher. I bought one. Okay, maybe Steve's wife bought it for me, but either way, we have one.
After the Hornet was spewing flames.
Yeah, like this thing is never tall enough. You know, I'm not that tall. Vacuum lines are a mess, and I won't show you them because I'm not proud of them, but I also don't care. I think we have pretty much everything tied together now, right? Nothing that will immediately cause a fire. Yeah, so this is the part where we plug the battery in for the first time on this engine and listen, smell, observe for anything that could potentially be uncool. Pump and stuff.
Are you ready?
Well, hang on. Let's make sure that this isn't in run or start. Oh, it was. No, it wasn't.
Oh.
We're off. We know we have a good battery. And I'll show you guys what battery I chose. Yeah, that's right. You're all wondering what's going to fit into the hood here. Okay, fire test, huh? We're going to look. Ooh, okay.
Something was not happy.
All right, folks. Right here. I don't know if you can see, but right through the heat shrink and the insulation, this lug right here, which is actually supplying 12 volts to the whole chassis, touched the mounting screw right here, which is touching the body. So as soon as we touched the positive to the battery, we got a dead short. So that's why we were trying to weld the battery terminal there. Here we go, fire test round 2.
All right. Hey, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, your CD player's on.
Oh!
Is that not on a
Jiggle
switch 12?
Jiggle your keys. Or maybe it's not on a switch.
Okay. I don't hear or smell anything else really bad. I'm just gonna bump the key just to make sure that our ignition circuit works and our start circuit works. So here we go, viewers. First time this engine has ever turned over. Yes. Oh, nice. Awesome.
Oh, that's hot. That was one. Something down there.
Oh.
Was it the starter?
Yeah.
I think it was the starter and the smoke coming up. Reach back to where the oil line goes over it.
Oh, it's not ground for the starter that's not on? Maybe that would do it. You guys, I'm telling you, we are electrical professionals, all of us, and man, are we stuck in shit today.
Don't tell them that.
Yeah, right? I mean, we've never done this before. All right, this will be take number 3. Someone forgot to hook up the ground wire for the battery, for the starter. So we were grounding the engine through the oil line to the turbo. That's why it cranked like shit. So we're gonna try this again. Let's see, only 3 potential fire hazards so far. It'd be awesome if I just turned the key and it fired off right now, perfectly tuned, like someone came in here and did it when I was gone.
Without any fuel, it'd be amazing.
Yeah, no fuel. Yeah, the only engine that runs with no gas. Okay.
Right away, you can tell that crank a lot easier.
Yes, it's cranking much better. Yeah. Do we have any oil pressure? No oil pressure yet, huh? You know. All right, I think we're gonna move on to configuring the computer. So I've got my handy dandy trans jack right here as my mobile programming workstation. I've downloaded TunerStudio and I've downloaded a couple of sample maps actually for MicroSquirt. I emailed EFI or DIY Auto-Tune, and they came back and said that they don't actually have any pre-generated maps for MicroSquirt applications because it's such a flexible platform. So what I'm gonna do is take the air fuel and timing and VE table stuff from like a base map for a KA that they have for MicroSquirt, because all the table sizes are the same. I'm gonna take those values and copy them into a tune that I'm gonna make for this engine. They have a whole guide on everything you should do to start this thing up, and we're gonna run through that now. I won't take you through it step by step exactly, just because it may bore some of you to death. But anyway, what I'm gonna do now is get connected to the ECU. I'm gonna plug in just a fuse for that, and then I'll get it hooked up to my laptop so that it can recognize itself, check the firmware in that ECU, and I may have to load firmware. So we'll pick up when we're connected to it. I'm actually following the MS2 setup guide, which is for any product running MicroSquirt 2, so the MS plug and play stuff and the MicroSquirt. I've already kind of moved to the step where I've got my computer talking to the MicroSquirt and serial communications is all set up. So I'm following this guide here, and essentially, because the MicroSquirt is such a flexible platform, everything that you bring into it, you have to make sure that it is set up so that the computer is going to read it right. What that means is every sensor that we use has to not only be calibrated, but we have to enter the values of min and max for that sensor in the computer. Otherwise, the values that are coming into the computer, it won't know, it won't recognize what that is or what it's supposed to mean. So a lot of this, what we're gonna do in the rest of this video is each sensor we have to use, we're gonna calibrate it, check the signal and set the min and max, and then move on to the next one. Once we've covered all the essential sensors that the MicroSquirt's gonna use, then maybe we can give it a try to start it up. Okay, next thing we're gonna do on the list is to actually calibrate the TPS. Considering I'm running speed density setup with just a throttle position sensor and a map, TPS is like the main sensor that you need other than the map. So in order to do that, and I won't show you a screen capture on this, anybody who's used TunerStudio before, you know where to find this. If you haven't found this, well, I don't have a really great way of showing a screen capture anyway. So, okay, so if you go to Tools on the top menu and then scroll down to Calibrate TPS, and I believe how this is done is, okay, so with the throttle position sensor totally closed, you say Get Current. And then, and while it's being held at full throttle, you hit the Get Current button. Oh, that's not good. Let go of it. Okay, do it again. Okay, so in this case, we got the same reading for each Get Current for both zero throttle and full throttle, which means that the TPS is wired incorrectly. So we're gonna have to swap wires around on that just to make sure, and we'll come back. Right here, Steve, if you wanna just activate the throttle, right now it's closed, he opens it all the way up. Our TPS goes to 100, and he lets it go, it should go back to 0. That is the one connector that I did not replace because it looked like it was gonna be okay. I now think I'm just going to get a new connector and wire that in. I think this is gonna work for us. We can move on to the next step, verifying the other sensors. The next sensor that we are going to calibrate is going to be the map sensor. Yeah, so if you go to Tools and then Calibrate Map, from the list here of common map sensors, I'm going to select the GM3 bar right here, and then I'm going to hit Burn. Ah, yes, okay. This actually makes sense. I'll zoom in on this when I edit this later, but here's the fuel load gauge, which is actually now reading 97.4 kPa. So Wisconsin is just what, very near sea level. So 100 kPa is pretty standard. We're very, very close to 100 kPa, which is atmospheric pressure. So that means that the map sensor is in fact reading correctly. Let's see, the next step after the map, I think would be, what, coolant temp sensor maybe? In order to calibrate the coolant temp sensor and the AFR table for the wideband gauge, we need to unlock the calibration. So I click Unlock Calibrations, it brings up this dialog window, change it to unlock, hit Burn, close this, go back to Tools, and now we can calibrate our coolant temperature sensor. So we're gonna set this to, there are settings here. So I found a forum post that has the values here for the coolant temp sensor resistance at whatever given values, as well as the bias resistor value. So I'm gonna find that and then we'll put those in. Found a post on this. The bias resistor here is 2490 ohms. 68 degrees is 2500 ohms. And then what was the next one? 250. Okay, 250 ohms. And the last one?
230. 145.
Okay. So now that we have the values in here for the coolant temp sensor, we can hit Write to Controller, and we got the write complete. So now you can close that. And the next thing that we're going to calibrate would be, is it the AFR table? Yep. All right, so here it's asking for the table input solution and the EGO sensor. EGO stands for exhaust gas oxygen sensor, and most people call it the wideband oxygen sensor, wideband O2. So I'm going to pull this down, and I believe my AEM-X series is an AEM-30-03 something. So it is this sensor, which is already pre-configured with the voltage and the corresponding AFR. So I'm going to hit Write to Controller on that. Okay, we get write complete, hit close. And so if you look now here at our air fuel ratio gauge, it is pegged rich. And that actually tracks because right now that AFR gauge is not powered up. So we're seeing, or the computer's looking for a certain voltage from that thing. It's seeing very little. So it's rich as can be. So that actually makes sense. And we will double check that in a minute here when we power up the AFR gauge. All right, next thing on the list is you should lock the calibrations. Now that everything is done, we're gonna change these to locked so that nobody can change or mess with the values of the sensors we put in. We have verified all the sensors that are connected to the engine are working, and we've set calibrations on all of them. All of our values make sense right now, other than our air fuel, because that gauge isn't even powered. The only thing that's powered right now is the ECU. We have a little battery charger we'll put on there just to keep it nice. At this point, we are ready to start putting in some configuration for the engine. Under basic load settings, we're going to do engine and sequential settings. The required fuel is a calculation that has to be done in order for the MegaSquirt or MicroSquirt to assign values to the VE table and to be able to correct itself later on. The main thing we're going to change here, so if you hit required fuel, it's going to ask you for your engine displacement. And if we go to CCs, we're going to type in, I think these are 24 or 2399 or something like that. It's a 2.4 liter. The injector flow. I know that decapped LS truck injectors flow around 750 cc's, and air fuel ratio at 14.7, we're gonna leave that. So it's probably hard to see this menu. I don't have a great way of capturing this. So we're gonna hit OK on that. Now our required fuel has been set. It's a different value than it was before. Our control algorithm, we're gonna stay with speed density because we're using TPS and a map sensor. I don't believe we need to change our injector. Yeah, we're not doing any staged injection. Squirts per cycle, I think should be 2. It is a 4-stroke, 4 cylinders, 4 injectors, and we're gonna leave the engine type at even fire. And down here we have the engine size and the injector size each at 750. We're gonna hit burn and send that to the computer. Next thing we're gonna do after engine and sequential will be injector dead time, right? So we have found, according to Holly's online resource, that the GM injectors are a very good dead time for a GM truck injector is, I mean, between 0.82 and 0.92 milliseconds. So what do you say? We just call it 0.9, which according to MicroSquirt's and MegaSquirt's manual, that's pretty average. We could probably just leave it at 1 millisecond. And then battery voltage correction, we'll probably leave that alone. There aren't different banks on this, so leave that. And we're gonna burn that as well. Okay, ignition stuff. So there should be, I can open up the ignition settings because we have to change a few things. Ignition options, all right. So we are, our spark mode, we are doing a toothed wheel. And I actually have to find this. I think I have it open over there. We'll get the settings that we need to try out for this. All right, so these settings here you can find on DIY Auto-Tune's website if you look for that DIY SR20 trigger disc. So for the ignition options, it's a toothed wheel. Skip pulses is 3. Ignition input capture falling edge. Spark output going high. Number of coils is wasted spark. Spark A output is ignition 1, which is the normal one. That's the first wire for ignition. The trigger wheel arrangement, it's a single wheel with a missing tooth. It's a 24 tooth wheel for trigger wheel, and then the missing teeth is 2. And then the tooth 1 angle before top dead center is 60 degrees. And then the wheel speed is set to the cam wheel. For fixed advance, we set it to fixed timing. So this is gonna lock the timing at 15 degrees so that we can change the offset to where while the thing is cranking or running, we can make sure that it lines up with the harmonic balancer. Our cranking advance is 10 degrees, so it's gonna retard the timing by 5 degrees to get the thing to run. Nominal dwell in milliseconds is 3. Spark duration in milliseconds is 1.5. And we're not gonna use spark hardware latency right now. We're gonna see how this thing runs. So, gonna burn it. That should be the ignition capture stuff. And with that, so I'm actually not using the idle air control valve on this. I may wire it up in the future, but for now, I'm just gonna leave it disconnected and plugged. I do still have the wire for it, but we're gonna skip that for today. We're to the point now where we verified all the sensors and stuff. We put in some basic ignition trigger stuff. So now we're just gonna test the injectors and the coil packs. I have these set up for batch fire and wasted spark. So I'm gonna test ignition output 1, which should fire injector 1 and 4 at the same time. So I have the fuel pump relay triggered to on, but the fuse is pulled, so we're not actually trying to run the pump yet. If I hit start, you should hear a buzzing. And what I did is I felt each one of these injectors to make sure that 1 and 4 are actually vibrating, or whatever you can actually hear that they're triggering right now. Okay, so now if we switch to injector 2, the other 2 should fire. There we go. All right, here we go. Tested all the coils packs, tested the injectors as well. All 4 of each are working and they're triggering properly. We accidentally tested the fuel pump without fuel. Whoops, hope that's okay. We're gonna put fuel in this thing for the first time. So here we go. I'm gonna put, I don't know, splash a few gallons in there and actually check the fuel system now. But kind of a big moment. I haven't had fuel in this tank ever. So,
Ever.
yeah, hopefully it doesn't leak. All right, we'll pick up after we prime the pump. Okay, here we go. Same thing as before, but now we put the fuse in for the fuel pump. So you can hear it, it's running.
Yep, I hear it. It's like 32.
I have that adjustable pressure regulator from Radium, so we should be able to just set the fuel pressure with the pump running. We're shooting for like 43, 44 PSI. So I guess, yeah, we'll just check for leaks. Is it holding pressure? No, it's not. Okay, that's fine. Aftermarket regulators, I guess, don't do that. All right, so I'm gonna trigger this again, and we'll set the fuel pressure here. Oh, look at this. Yeah, you can just turn it up. Look at this. I'm assuming shoot for like 44. Bam. So now that we've verified we have fuel and coils, injectors, and everything are working, last thing that we need to check before we actually try to start this thing is the signal from the cam sensor inside the distributor. To do that, we're going to use the diagnostics and high-speed counters tab on TunerStudio. So just following the guide that they put out there, we're going to start the log and then crank it for 10 seconds, and we're going to look at the readout that comes from the cam sensor signal.
It said offline when you were cranking.
Yeah, something's not right here. Okay, it's a few days later. Let's see. We got really far yesterday, but kind of ran out of steam towards the end of the night. Ended up finding some issues with the way that I wired the cam sensor for the distributor. I followed the MicroSquirt hardware manual. I thought I had it wired right. Apparently I didn't. We tried a couple of things. I had to switch the polarity on the trigger in the software. I'll cover that more a little bit later. The main issue of concern was that while we were cranking this thing yesterday, we did not get any oil pressure. I thought maybe these oil pumps would self-prime. Did a little bit of Googling. Turns out that maybe you have to pack the gears with grease in the oil pump, and then, or with Vaseline or something, and that will cause enough suction to pull oil from the pan. To this point, I still have not got oil pressure. So instead of taking the timing cover off, which is going to require dropping the oil pan and potentially pulling the engine, because I can't drop the oil pan with it in the car, I don't think, I have an option here. Let me explain. I'll show you what I found. Here's a factory KA timing cover. Here's the oil pump. Here's the pressure regulator, and here is where the oil pump pickup tube bolts on and drops into the pan. If you look closely, you can see maybe here's the oil pump cover, and then you can probably see this, there's a passage right here, and if you look, this is the main port that comes out of the oil pump and goes into the block. Well, if you look at the front of the timing cover, you may be able to see this passage right here comes to this little plug right there. It's blocked off from the factory. However, what I noticed was on the aftermarket KA timing cover, this port has a hex plug in it right here. So what I did is I pulled this hex plug and I went to the hardware store and got a fitting that threads into that hole, and it's just a barb fitting. So what I'm gonna do is apply pressurized oil right to this port which should push oil directly into the pump. And then I think once I get oil pressure going in there, I may manually rotate the engine backwards just a little bit. But I'll show you exactly where this is on the car. You may be able to see it from the top, but all I did was put a fitting in there, and then I'm gonna pump some oil in, and I'll show you how I'm gonna do that. Oh man, these weed sprayers are like zip ties. There's so many uses for these. I have a couple of these things. You pump them up and you can pressurize them. And they work really good. I use them actually to test my injectors, to clean them out and stuff and back flush them. But this one that I purchased is one of them that has a hose. And the reason I want the hose is so that I can shove it over the barb fitting. With this setup right here, I can actually fill the oil pump with pressurized oil, and I can pre-lube this engine to hopefully get some freaking oil pressure so that this thing does not kill itself. It never spun fast. I think the maximum we ever had it spinning was maybe 130 RPM, and that was towards the end of the day. So I'm hoping that no damage has been done to this engine, but because I did not see any oil pressure on the gauge, that's why I'm going this route. So I'm making my own pre-luber setup with this weed sprayer right here. So here's a quick look at what's going on. Ignore this, I'll explain later. So right down there, you can see that hole. That is the hole on the side of the timing cover that will feed oil directly into the oil pump. All I had to do was loosen the alternator, move the belt off, move the alternator out of the way. Now I can put a fitting in there and a hose from that weed sprayer. All right, you guys see where I'm going with this. There's a weed sprayer. I got some whatever 1030 Rotella in there. That's hooked up right to that port on the side of the block. I'm gonna pump that up slowly and see if I see anything on my oil pressure gauge. Main reason I'm doing this is Steve gave me a really sound piece of advice yesterday, and that was that I should definitely verify I have oil pressure before we do any other testing. And we did get to the point where we would have to crank the engine a lot. So anyway, this is my last ditch effort to try to make sure that I have a primed oil system. If this doesn't work, then it's either going to be pulling the timing cover, dropping the oil pan, and or hopefully not, but maybe pulling the whole engine. Okay, I'm going to pump from down here so that I can watch that oil line, see if it's leaking, and it probably will. All right, go read my gauge. Okay, our gauge is still saying 0. I hear something going on. Valve cover. Okay, now I'm going to roll the engine backwards just a little bit so that I can maybe suck up a little more of that oil pressure. Okay, we can put some oil in it for sure. Alright, still nothing on the gauge. Hey, holy shit, we have a non-zero reading. Okay, it's like 1 pound, but okay, good. We actually had a non-zero reading on our pressure gauge, so I'm gonna pull that fitting and put this plug back in and then give the engine a crank. Here we go. Come on, oil pressure. Okay, still nothing. Oh, there we go! Oh, we got it! Yes! All right! Oh, man! Holy shit! One more time for good measure. Hell yes! Holy shit, we've got oil pressure. Oh my god. Ah, okay. For literally $8. Okay, maybe 12 with this fitting, right? I made my own oil pressure pre-luber. So just to let any of you KA guys know, if you get an aftermarket timing cover that has a plug, you can use this method to pre-lube the engine before you start it. No need to pack the gears with grease. There you go. $8 just saved my engine. After that near heartbreak, I think we can now finally get back to what we were doing with the MicroSquirt. We were just about to the point where we were ready to verify the timing for the computer to the engine. And in order to do that, we needed a good tach signal. Now we have a good tach signal. I have to do some rewiring really quick, and then maybe we can get back to that. Welcome back. Another day after work and the gym. Last time I was out here, I solved the oil pressure problem on this KA. Thank God. It actually makes oil pressure. Now we can continue on. The last thing we need to do before we actually start the engine is to verify the physical timing of the engine matches the timing that the ECU is reading or seeing. So there's a couple of parameters we're gonna have to set. Basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lock the computer at 15 degrees timing, and we're gonna turn it over with the injectors disabled, the coil packs enabled. What I have here set up is the coil pack on number 1. I have it running to a chunk of regular spark plug wire that goes into that, and then I have a regular timing light right here so that I can actually point this at the crank or the balancer and check the timing. I've been fighting this thing for like the last, 45 minutes maybe? Hooked up 2 different timing lights to it, and I know with the wasted spark stuff, it doesn't, sometimes timing lights struggle with it, and my timing light doesn't have a 2-stroke setting, and the other timing light I have, it's not really reliable. So I think I saw a couple of flashes where I needed to, because it does fire twice per 4 cycles, right? I think I saw where it was. I made an adjustment to the timing, and the mark did move the next time I saw it. So I'm to the point now where I think we're close, and I really just want to try and fire it up. So I think without any further ado, I think we're going to give this a try. All right, here we go. Attempt number 1. I did my best to verify the timing. I think I have it where I need it. I will check that more once we get going. Okay, take 2. I thought I had the injector fuses in. I did not. So here we go. First time with fuel. Okay, try again. All right, I'll try one more time. I think what is happening there. All right, yeah, I have a sneaking suspicion that our timing is really far off. Okay, I'll admit off camera, we made a change, and I think we are headed in the right direction. It sounded like this thing was trying to fire 180 degrees off. So either the distributor is 180 degrees out, which I really thought I had it exactly right in there, or there's something with the trigger wheel, the way I've got it set up. I'm not exactly sure. What I figured is, if the distributor is 180 degrees out, can I advance or flip, put the offset in for the ignition timing or for the cam sensor? If I add 180 degrees to the current offset that I have, I should be right where I need it as far as to get it to run so it'll stop firing backwards. Anyway, without further ado, let's see if I can get this turd to run. Here we go, Dr. Cotto. It runs! Oh, man! Holy shit! For those of you that have watched the last like 50 videos on this car, that means something to me. Holy shit, that's awesome. Runs like shit because it's stuck at 15 degrees timing and it's super lean. And when I was trying to rev it there and just keep it alive, we're also not running an IAC valve. So holy cow, for whatever reason, I needed to add a huge offset to the ignition trigger setup. That's okay, it runs somewhat good. It actually idled, I couldn't believe it. I should have checked the AFR gauge when we were doing that, but I don't want to run it too long. It doesn't have a charging system, doesn't have a cooling system, whatever. Yes! All right, viewers, you saw it here first. Actually, you saw it second. We did it off camera to make sure we could get it right for you guys. Doesn't matter. This turd finally fucking runs. It's amazing. But now the pressure's on. We literally have 3 weeks until we leave for power tour, and this thing does start and idle actually. It just needs a bunch of tuning. So stay tuned for that. Thank you if you've watched this far. Thank you to all my subscribers and supporters for sticking around. Thank you to my beautiful wife for tolerating cranking this thing for 48 minutes. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you in the next one.